So the nature of the study, the purpose of it is that it describes what research method and design are applied to your research study. So best place to talk about this is to start with making sure you understand what a research method and what a research design is and perhaps what it is not. Research methods are those such as qualitative or quantitative, or perhaps a mixed method study, which incorporates both qualitative and quantitative. As your dissertation chairs speak with you, as you start to articulate with others the type of research method, what they're asking for is what is the approach you're going to take? Are you going to be applying the qualitative or quantitative method? And then the design. The design is within the research method. What design are you applying? For example, in a quantitative study, a couple of the different designs would be correlation or causality. In qualitative research methods, several designs you might find are phenomenological study. You might find the design to be a case study or an ontological study. What they're asking for in this section of the nature of the study is for you to describe which one you have chosen in regards to the research method and the research design. The nature of the study informs the reader why you also chose your research method and design. It's not enough just to tell us which one you're using. You have to describe why and tell, in your understanding, what is the rationale for applying that research method and design that will collect the correct data needed to provide information that can go back later once your dissertation is done to help lessen the problem for the stakeholders that are experiencing the problem that you articulated in the problem statement. In the nature of the study, here we provide basic information that gets expanded upon later in Chapter 3. What I'm going to share with you is how to write 4 paragraphs. 4 paragraphs is all you need in the nature of the study section, as far as I'm concerned, to move you forward. What you'll do later in Chapter 3 is then expand upon that. Much of the work in Chapter 1 is a preview of what comes in other chapters later. So as you continue to refine your work, it's not uncommon that what you write in Chapter 1 gets built upon more in following chapters. This nature of the study section also provides for some of the seminal research authors who are the founding experts or the applied experts today of the research method and design that you have chosen. I'll give several examples of that as I go through inputs from my mentees, the examples from their actual approved dissertations, for you to get a better understanding of who I might be referring to. The nature of the study in its basic fundamental design is providing your ability to discern, using your critical thinking skills, why you've chosen your research method and design. We want to know not only why you've picked it, the rationale why you've picked it, and in addition to those, we want to gain a sense that you've considered others and that you are able to articulate and fully understand, perhaps as a consumer of research first, that you understand research method and designs and what they're each appropriate for. The nature of the study section, as I indicated, talks about providing the seminal research authors. Seminal research authors are those who contributed the foundational theories and the ideas to the research in that field, what I call the masters. Now, they may be somebody who originated a theory maybe 30, 40, 100 years ago, but they're also people today who are subject matter experts who people go to for advice and insights when they're doing their research. They may be professors at universities, they may be actual researchers themselves, but they are also people who collectively have gained a reputation worthy of emulating and worthy of going to. Now, these people are those who are noted experts in their areas. For instance, Jean Piaget, he is considered a seminal author to cognitive development, as Frederick Taylor is to scientific management. My personal background stems from the theoretical frameworks of scientific management. So if I was going to do a study on Six Sigma, do some research perhaps on supply chain management or on how McDonald's or any fast food organization's processes are developed so well, I would have to consider Frederick Taylor as a seminal author and look at what he did as creating the foundation for scientific management. I would then bring it to current day settings and find out who the experts are today in the field and cite them as well. So in research, we have the same types of seminal authors. We have those who created or originated certain research theories and designs, or frameworks, if you will, and we want to cite those, as well as we have those who are experts today, well known, publishing new books or new articles about how to develop research methods and designs to a greater extent. There are seminal authors for both quantitative and for qualitative research. I'm certainly not going to try to describe to you a list of each under each category here, but what I will do through the examples I'm going to share with you, show you several authors who have been applied as the seminal authors and why, and to what research method and design they are coordinated with. I will also share information at the end of this program where you can go to find information to find out more about different seminal authors for both quantitative and qualitative work. Just because you have a textbook from a research course that may be created by somebody like Creswell does not necessarily mean that Creswell is an expert in everything. It just may be somebody who is able to write books on topics that are varied because he's an expert in research overall, but he may not be the best researcher for each individual type of method and design. And I'll share a little bit more about that as this part of the program continues. One of the most important things I can emphasize here at this section of the program is, as you write this section of nature of the studies, to keep it simple. 4 paragraphs. You don't have to get overly carried away with adding too much information. Sometimes more is just more, it's not better. What we're looking for is for you to be able to communicate that you have an understanding of why that chosen research method and design are appropriate, as well as why perhaps some of the other ones were not. You, again, being able to discern through your writing that you've been able to apply your critical thinking skills. But let's keep it simple. 4 paragraphs. I'm going to give you exactly the guidance you need for each of those paragraphs. Again, written in the research context, that you're going to be applying words and terminologies aligning with the research context or the connotation of research, in the sense that you're not going to be writing just about qualitative and quantitative research methods and designs. You're also going to be talking about alignment, and certain word choices go with each. For example, if you're going to do a survey, that tends to align itself in a research context with quantitative. If you're going to do interviews, that research context aligns more so with qualitative. In this section, we want you to be able to express, not impress people with your writing. All too often in this area, people start to write in a convoluted way that's not simple to understand. You don't have to be a well-known expert researcher to do a doctoral dissertation, and we're not expecting you to be that well-known dissertation research person. We're expecting you to be that journey layperson who's perhaps doing a research study for the very first time. So we just want you to be able to express your thoughts and express your critical thinking in a manner that's conducive with doctoral level writing, but also inclusive of the research context. You need to cite a couple research subject matter experts, these seminal authors which I was just talking about, in each of the 4 paragraphs I'm going to describe that you need to put together. This will ground your work in a manner that's conducive, yes, with the research context, but also in academic research. Again, as I give you examples from some of my mentees, you'll see those. So the first paragraph of the 4 paragraphs you need to write in the nature of the study section is as such, where you describe why the chosen research method is appropriate for the data needed to provide information for stakeholders to use to lessen a specific problem. So what's this really break down to? What we're asking for in this one paragraph, that's 3 to 7 sentences long, probably averages about 5, yes, 5 good sentences is more than enough for one paragraph, where you help the reader understand that you know why your research method is appropriate. So if you have chosen to use a quantitative research method, that you describe why you have chosen that, why it's appropriate, how it's going to produce the type of data that you will need. Whereas if you used a qualitative research method, you would describe why that type of research was needed to produce the themes or perhaps the insights from people's discussions, which would then be the data needed to provide the stakeholders with information. Remember, at the foundation of all the dissertation work, what we're looking to do, as with any other research studies, we collect data that we can gain information from as we apply our skills of analysis. And then that allows us to take that information, communicate it in findings, recommendations, and conclusions that hopefully will produce information that's worthy for those stakeholders to use to lessen the problem that you articulated in the problem statement when you began your study. So in this section, again, we're just looking for what research method you have chosen, and you would be telling us why, the rationale for it. In the second paragraph, here you're going to describe why another research method is not appropriate for the data needed to provide information that you need to help lessen the problem for those stakeholders. Here you're looking at the opposite, if you will, of paragraph number 1. If you chose quantitative and you explained why the quantitative research method was appropriate in the first paragraph, here in the second paragraph, tell us why the other, in this case, would be qualitative research, why that method was not appropriate, why that was not valid, if you will, for the type of data that you need. So all we're asking in these first 2 paragraphs is simply tell us and justify and provide the rationale for why you've chosen the research method and why another one was not correct. This can be a little bit subjective, and that's okay because much research is subjective. It's subjective to the author's frame of mind. But you can see here by 2 full paragraphs telling the audience why your chosen research method is appropriate and why it's not, you can see that that would provide this discerning critical thinking perspective of why something's appropriate, why something's not. And that's the biggest part of the proposal or dissertation at this point in this section, is to help the reader better understand that you do understand research. You are somewhat of a consumer of research, and you know enough about research as to what research method and design is appropriate and perhaps which one or which ones are not. So those are the first 2 paragraphs. Let's talk about the second 2 paragraphs. Paragraph number 3 then will be describe why the chosen research design is appropriate for the data needed. Here we're looking for which design within the method have you chosen. If you have chosen a quantitative study, and paragraph number 1 had information about why quantitative research method was applied. Here we're going to ask you to tell us which design did you use. Are you going to use a correlation design, a causality design, a descriptive design? Which one do you want to apply? There's others, but you only need to tell us here why you choose the one you did. If you're looking at cause and effect relationships, tell us why you chose cause and effect and what value that gives to you in taking your independent variables and comparing them to the dependent variable in a cause and effect relationship. Or perhaps you have decided to use a qualitative study. And so your qualitative method would be applied, and perhaps in this section here in paragraph number 3, now you're writing about why you have chosen to use a case study or phenomenological study or whatever research design you have chosen. So if you're doing a qualitative case study, the first paragraph would be about why qualitative method was applied. Now in this one, you're going to talk about why the case study is appropriate for collecting the data slant information that you need, again, to help lessen the specific problem. See how these are aligning? So the first paragraph was the chosen research method and design. The second one was why one of the other ones was not appropriate for your study. Now in paragraph number 3, you're telling us why your research design was appropriate. And guess what's in the 4th paragraph? Here's where we ask you to describe why one or 2 other research designs in the same research method are not ideal. So, for example, if you decided to use a quantitative correlation study, here what we would like you to do is tell us why you did not use a quantitative causality study or any of the other research designs in quantitative work. If you decide to use a qualitative case study, here tell us why you have decided and what was the rationale for not using a phenomenological study or perhaps an ontological study. There's no reason to share here one or two examples of what you didn't use from a completely different research method. You can stay just within the design, because what you're sharing with the audience here is that you have applied your critical thinking skills, that you have decided that within the research method, which research design is the most appropriate and which ones are not used and why not. So if you look at the 4 sections of the nature of the study, all you're simply doing is helping the reader to understand that you know why your chosen research method is appropriate, and you're sharing the rationale for that choice and that decision. In the second paragraph, you're sharing with the audience why the other research method is not the best or ideal or appropriate for the data you need. The third paragraph tells you, audience, why you have chosen the research design and why it's appropriate. Again, giving the rationale for that. And then the fourth paragraph, why one or two other research designs in the same method are not ideal. If you look at it from the pure simplistic perspective, that's all we're asking for here. What we're asking for is for you to give evidence of why you've chosen your research method and design. Help us to better understand that as a consumer of research, you know why others are not. Some people just decide they're going to do a quantitative correlation study because somebody told them to do that. Or a dissertation chair likes to do qualitative phenomenological studies because they're an expert in that field and they don't want to do anything else. And so they tell their mentees, if you want to do a study, you have to do a qualitative phenomenological study. Well, that may be true, a little sad, but it may be true. That doesn't help anybody else understand that you know the realities of why you're actually doing that research method and design. You may, in fact, have the right rationale for doing the research method and design as you're told to do. There's nothing wrong with that, but we need to make sure you understand that there are others out there and what their value is to research. What I am going to offer now are some examples from my prior mentees who have completed their dissertation work. So the content will be written in the past tense as compared to a proposal in the future tense. Most of my mentees, as I mentioned before, tend to get their proposals and dissertations approved on the first pass through the university review process. And that's not necessarily just because of me. It's because they work hard, needless to say, but they're able to take the guidance that I gave them and apply it and make their incremental gains on a consistent basis to get them done with their programs. Each of the examples that I'm going to share with you, I have written consent from each one of them to use their work in a manner to help others, and what we call brain tithing, that they're sharing their knowledge in a way that gives of themselves to others. They own the copyright on their work. My copyright is only for the program design itself, and they maintain the copyright for all their work. I will share the information of each author and the title of their dissertations. So in case you want to go to ProQuest Dissertations and download their work and read their full dissertation, or if you care to communicate with them, I would be happy to connect you with them if you email me, and that way you may have some insights or questions you might have of that subject matter expert. The first example is from Dr. Maria Aponte. The title of her dissertation is Selling: The Lived Experiences of Domestic Property and Casualty Insurance Leaders. Here's a point, what I call a learning opportunity, in the sense that in the title, since she talks about the lived experiences, I am under the belief as a consumer research that lived experiences deal with qualitative phenomenological research. So the research method would be qualitative and the research design would be phenomenological, because phenomenological research is designed specifically to take lived experiences and then gather information about themes, about experiences of people who have all been involved in a certain phenomena, if you will. So let's see what she had to say here. In this section, she talked about the research study involved a qualitative phenomenological descriptive approach. So much like her title alluded to, we can see now she actually goes into saying the qualitative phenomenological approach. She talks about Metaskis here. Metaskis is somebody who is perceived as a leading expert in the field of phenomenological study. So I would consider him a seminal author. Posits researchers working with phenomenology aimed at understanding the meaning of lived experiences through descriptive means. So you can see how she's tying in the words based on what she read in his work, and we're seeing the alignment of the research context, as I mentioned earlier. As we start to see the alignment of research method and designs, we start to see words being applied that are appropriate for that research method and design. Researchers can use quantitative and qualitative approaches or modes of inquiry to research. So what she's starting to do here is say that there are other methods, but she's going to explain why she chose what she did. Quantitative researchers emphasize testing and verification, collecting quantifiable data from participants and specific narrow questions. Now she's starting to quote somebody, Creswell, who is perhaps perceived more as a quantitative researcher, subject matter expert, as compared to qualitative. Now, he may have and created many books on both method and designs, as well as each type of method and design within research, but he's more noted as a quantitative. Just because somebody writes a book doesn't necessarily make him a subject matter expert. He happens to be a professor, and he's able to write books because he has a vast amount of experience. Creswell further explained that mixed methods, so here, rather than me complete the full sentence, she starts to talk about how mixed methods, because that's yet another research method. There's research methods of qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods. So she's starting to give information not only about the work that she's chosen with qualitative, she's given some insights into the others. I get a sense that she knows what she's talking about, that she understands research. Then she goes on into now focusing more on qualitative studies. And you'll see she gives another couple authors here that have combined in putting together a research book, Leidy and Ormrod. So you can find these people as well and look at their work if you're doing qualitative methods and perhaps the phenomenological design. Here she talks about qualitative studies enable the researcher to gain new insights about particular phenomena and to test the validity of certain assumptions. In qualitative work, when people do interviews of those in phenomenological designs, they tend to be looking for the assumptions, beliefs, values, perceptions, and experiences of people. So as we start to see even more with her work, the alignment of terminology and words used, she even introduces the word phenomena here because that's what phenomenological study is about, looking at specific phenomena, not a certain situation. Let's use the correct terminology in the research context to communicate what you're actually looking for. So here, these have been a couple of examples of sentences and paragraphs. Here's another sentence. She goes on to say phenomenological studies are designed to identify individual perspectives, perceptions, and understandings. And she cites them. So you can see why what she's doing when she chose qualitative phenomenological study is appropriate. Now, Dr. Joe Hagee, his title is a little bit different. Now, his title is Influence of Religion and Religiosity on Leadership Practices in the Workplace, a Quantitative Correlation Study. Now, he was right up front with this and telling the reader that he's doing a quantitative correlation study. Now, just to let you know that Dr. Joe Hagee received the Dissertation of the Year Award for Quantitative Studies at the University of Phoenix in the year 2013. He wrote an exemplary study. And it wasn't because of me. It was only because I helped him with the incremental gains of understanding the format and the flow. And he's an expert researcher already. He's already an expert with quantitative statistics. So he was able to do this relatively simple. Here he talks in his work about the correlation design is appropriate. So remember, I told you that the first paragraph is why your chosen research method is appropriate. Now he actually puts it in the words, and there's nothing wrong with that. And he talks about, again, adding here in the research context and terminology to determine the relationship. In quantitative work, we look at relationships. So we can see, even if we didn't know it was quantitative, by him talking about relationships, there is a connection there that aligns well. Results of the design can show a positive correlation, a direct relationship, a negative correlation, or no correlation at all. This helps me to understand that this person is a consumer of research, because not always is there going to be a correlation. We look at to see to what extent, if any, there is a correlation. So I can see by him writing this section that he has an alignment and understanding what he's working on. Here we see correlations do not imply causation. Now he's starting to introduce why the causality type research design was not applied and why he's using correlation. He's not looking for cause and effect relationship. He's looking at correlation, how one independent variable correlates to the other, and looking at multiple independent variables in the same manner as compared to looking to see if one causes something else to happen. Here you'll see near the end he adds in a couple different authors you may not have seen yet or may not even be aware of. Through his research he was able to find another couple authors that are Duckworth, Takayama, and May, as well as Steinberg. So these are in addition to Leidy and Ormrod. So there are many different authors out there that you can look at to include in your work. You don't have to just take the 2 or 3 which are most commonly applied, because those are the authors of textbooks provided in most university research courses. Now for example number 3, Dr. Patricia Schroeder presents in her title a quantitative correlation study. She goes right from the beginning, a quantitative correlation study, and she goes on to say what that correlation is. What I like about her title is it helps me to immediately understand what her study is as far as research method and design, what the topic of it was, and where it was done, because she talks about that she did it in Turkey. So in this, it's very simple to understand, and what I find important in creating the title that's inclusive of the research method and design is that when a search engine looks for it, it's able to identify it very quickly. Or when the reader looks at this dissertation title as compared to others they may be finding in a search engine, immediately, if they're looking to find information about quantitative correlation studies, they can open this one up and know that within it, that's what's there. Same thing if somebody wanted to know about research that's current and recent in Turkey, this would show up as well. The proposed study used a quantitative method to collect numeric data. Here we start to see yet again where the alignment of research context and terminology is, because a quantitative study is about numeric data. And she looked at Turkish employees' perceptions of cultural values, supervisor leadership practice, and personal creativity and innovation. Here we see the dependent independent variables showing up as well. And this helps us to better understand by reading this why she's doing this quantitative study and what the values are that she's looking at. She goes on to write, quantitative survey research provides the self-reporting, and that's the point that's an alignment here again with research terminology and context, is that surveys are self-reporting. You give surveys to people, they send them back in. They're self-reporting based on what they believe to be their understandings of what the questions were. Here we see a couple more authors from 2009 that you might want to consider, because they gave some information about cross-sectional population sampling. So here's some subject matter experts that we would see in quantitative work, but we wouldn't see it in qualitative studies because these are not authors which are as popular in qualitative studies. She goes on to talk about other authors and provides in there, when she talks about cross-cultural research, the standardization of questions and data collecting procedures. Now, these authors give more information about that specific part of quantitative research. So we start to see, as we delve deeper into a research method and its design, that there are authors then specialize in certain things, such as collecting data, how to analyze data, how to create surveys. It's not just one author who's talked about consistently throughout. Dr. Schroeder went on to talk about, or present, if you will, a correlation design was used to examine the extent to which there may be a relationship between Turkish employees, cultural values, perceptions, leadership practices, and self-reported creativity and innovation. A correlation design was used to examine the extent to which there may be a relationship. Again, there may be a relationship, there may not be a relationship. So I understand that she as a consumer of research, gets that and is aware that there may actually be no relationship. And then she goes on to talk about her dependent and independent variables. So this is a well-crafted sentence that grounds her as a good consumer of research. She then went on to write, a correlation design is common in research in many disciplines as it provides the testing of models that involve independent, mediating, and independent variables. So as she included her variables, she also now includes a citation to help support why that type of research method and design is common and therefore appropriate. A correlation design is also appropriate when there may be temporal order between independent, mediating, and dependent variables. So she goes now into this a little bit farther, which is fine, and then cites Creswell. So Creswell is fine in this case because his work is more quantitative in nature and is perceived as more of an expert in quantitative research than qualitative research. And she continued on saying research as described in the literature review for this study indicated there is a sequential relationship between cultural values, leadership practices, and outcome of employee innovation. Because she did this, it made a connection to Chapter 2. So there's a strength now here, more so in her nature of the study section, which isn't required, but certainly helpful because now I know when I get into Chapter 2, I'm going to find out some information about what those indications are. I'm going to see how those sequential relationships are put together as by her storyline that she created to be able to show this. So now we see how this section gets connected even more into Chapter 2. So this is an impressive point that she included after she completed her literature review and she realized that there's some connections here. So then she was able to write about it and include it into the nature of the study section. The final example from Dr. Suzanne Krysteniak, her title of her dissertation was Exploring the Experiences of Complementary Therapy Nurses, a Qualitative Phenomenological Study. Because she talked initially about experiences, we know that it would be correlated to qualitative and more than likely phenomenological because phenomenological studies about lived experiences. So as you see here, even while their information is provided about what is the research method and design, she uses terminology appropriately so for alignment of this sentence. Here, she starts out the nature of the study section, literally the research method chosen for the current study is qualitative. There's nothing wrong with being expressively succinct and exact as you start out the paragraph, much like you did in the problem statement, where you start out a paragraph with the general problem is and the specific problem is for the second paragraph. Here she's being very upfront, and I like this. She goes on to say qualitative research secures the perceptions of study participants. Remember, qualitative phenomenological studies about assumptions, beliefs, values, perceptions, and experiences. So we again see the alignment. And if you're familiar with qualitative phenomenological studies or any kind of qualitative work, the outcome tends to be common themes in the sense of what were the common themes of everybody who was interviewed or of the research that was done. So in the case of phenomenological study, if she talked with 20 individual people and asked them all the same questions, the answers would produce themes in alignment with each of those questions. Here we see another author that's appropriate for this type of research method and design. Somebody you may not have heard of, and that's the value of looking at other people's research studies, is that you can oftentimes learn who other authors are and other experts and seminal authors are. She went on to say, conversely, quantitative designs pursue a more targeted focus through specific questioning. So questioning and numerical measurements tend to align with quantitative work. So again, we see how the word, the terminology within this sentence aligns well with the quantitative design. And you see yet another author here that she's applied. Like life. The more you put into it, the more you get out of it. I'm a firm believer with your proposal and dissertation work, this is very true, that if you truly want to produce a significant, substantial dissertation, that the more you put into it now and along the way, the better off you're going to be in the long run, because you're going to produce something that you're proud of, as well as that the university will be proud to have their name on too. That concludes this section on Nature of the Study section in Chapter 1. Thank you.